Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 10th, i.e. the number 10, MLOps.WTF. Why do I emphasize number 10? Because there are rumors of another number 10 in this building. So I don't know if anyone noticed that there were more armed police outside this building than there usually would be. Is the shoplifting incorrect? They're just trying to put a stop to it, deal with it once and for all. I don't think I'm revealing any state secrets by pointing out that the media has suggested that this very building may in fact be the seat of number 10 of the North. So isn't that fortuitous that we have MLOps.WTF number 10? And I'm hoping that Andy Burnham will make an appearance. I had kind of built the evening around him, so well, let's see. So yeah, my name is Matt. I'm the CTO, one of the founders at Fuzzy Labs. We set up MLOps.WTF last year with the intention of creating a community of people who are excited about productionizing AI and all of the various and growing topics that come into that subject. So there's a number of people I've spoken to who are here for the first time as well. So thanks very much for coming. It's great to see you. Great to meet you. Hope to see you at future events as well. At the previous meetup, for those who were there, we had this provocative topic, which was agents can be secure or useful, but not both. And we debated that subject. It was originally coined by Simon Willison, AI security researcher. So we thought we'd come up with something similar for tonight, which is agents can be cheap or useful, but not both. So that's the topic we're here to discuss. We really want to talk about, how do we measure, how do we realize the return on investment in AI, particularly for agentic AI. So I am joined by 4 incredible panelists tonight to discuss that topic. So we have Chris Ashley, the VP of strategy at, I'm going to say PKI UiPath now, but we're going to say PKI for posterity's sake. We have Eric Applewhite, who is a director at Deloitte. And then Johnny Williams, the chief digital advisor for UK public sector at Red Hat. Johnny also got married a few days ago, so congratulations, Johnny. And last but not least is Ruby Motorboy, who is senior lead. That's right.
That's right.
Excellent. So I want to talk about MLOps.WTF in a little bit more detail. So I say this is a way to talk about how we productionize AI. We also run a newsletter on the same subject. So if this is the kind of thing that interests you, and since you're all in the room and no one's left yet, I assume that it does, then you might want to sign up for our newsletter. You can do so by scanning the QR code and providing your email address. Have a go, have a read. If you don't like it, you can always unsubscribe. And, be reasonable. We have bought you pizza and beer and put on this event for you. So it's the least you could do. But it's really good. I would say that way. I'm biased, but it's we even made our QR code purple for you. Come on. Okay. So what are we going to do tonight? So a quick run through of the timings. We have already had kickoff and welcome. That's this. We've had networking. So we'll start the panel and then we'll go for about 45 minutes before we move into audience questions. I'll try and keep us to time as much as possible, but there's a lot we can talk about tonight. So, when we did our dry run, we realized there's a million different ways this can go. Hopefully the audience questions will take us in a million directions as well. And then afterwards, there is more time for networking and discussions if you have further questions for our panelists. And I believe there's more pizza and more drinks as well. So let's see. I like to do a little bit of a poll as well. So maybe we could jump onto this and we'll jump into the debate in a moment. But I am interested in how many of you would say you're using agentic AI in your day-to-day work to sort of enhance your productivity. That is essentially the majority of the room. This is good. How many of you think it's actually made you more productive? Also, most of the room, which I'm glad to see. Those of you that put your hand up, you can tell us why later. Just how many people have a token leaderboard? Does anyone have a token leaderboard? Wow. Yes. Am I allowed to say what company you work at? Maybe you can tell them later. Fantastic. Okay. Good. So, let's see. Agentic AI is being adopted across practically every job role, whether that's engineering, marketing, sales, operations, and we feel that individual productivity is up, right? I think we can probably agree with that sentiment. We've seen that in the poll. Teams are shipping faster, but many businesses are asking themselves why it is that the impact of AI is not showing up on their bottom line. Where is the return on investment? How do we measure that? And, we could talk about the economics of tokens. We could talk about scale versus cost, FinOps, governance, as well as small and specialized models. We're going to try and touch on all of those topics. And for my first question, what I'd like to do is kind of go to Eric here and kind of, can you help us understand the problem that we're faced with? So I know last year Deloitte published this report, which was titled AI Tokenomics, a CFO's Guide to Governing the AI Profit and Loss. So quite a long title there. You can Google it afterwards if you want to read the whole thing. It's riveting. It's quite interesting. Maybe
it is interesting. If you would like it, I'll pass it on.
Sorry, but that key observation in the report is that we're shifting to tokens as the kind of economic model for measuring investment, at least. How should we be thinking about cost and value in this era of agentic AI?
So, I mean, the world is changing around us. You may have heard that the agents are coming and they're already here, is the answer. I think what we are trying to understand and what we think is changing is this question of value. So, my really descriptive title of a director at Deloitte, one of the things I do is I build Gen AI COEs. And if I'm lucky, I get to operate within those COEs and then build agents and get them to scale. And I don't want to Admiral Akbar this too much, but with the new economics of tokens, it can be a little bit of a trap, right? One of the things that's happened is we've thought about total cost of ownership. We've thought about licenses, seats, volumes of data, right? One of the things that changes in an agentic system is it's so variable that as it's calling, collaborating with other agents, validating its activities, and if it is on 24/7, it is very difficult to predict what its costs will be. And you could find yourself, especially in an enterprise organization, in a situation where you might be delivering value, but the value that you think is so important is now being delivered proportional to your cost base, right? And it can be an existential issue. So I think we're trying to understand for ourselves as Deloitte and for our clients what that means. So one of the things I think we are saying and others are saying is tokens are now not just a kind of consumption or compute model. They're an economic signal or an economic model. So I kind of cut out at the wrong time. But anyway, they're an economic signal as well, right? They're both. So I guess a bit like light, right? In high school physics, sometimes they're a particle, sometimes they're a wave. I'll get that. And to understand that becomes really complex. And there are sort of three types of consumption models that I think we have looked at. One is the traditional SaaS, kind of we use a vendor, their tokens are in a black box. That's easier for us, but we have much less control over the spend and they can pass on their cost to us in a way that's proportional or not proportional, fair or unfair. You can also use the API model where you're calling out. That's fine. I think what our research shows is those type of consumption models are best when you're experimenting, right? This is probably intuitive that that's the case, but I don't think people are operating as if that's intuitively the case, right? The question most of my clients are asking now is what can we build with Agentic? Not what value should we deliver with Agentic? What's it going to cost to deliver that value? And how will we know that the value is going to be delivered? Can you see the paradigm shift? I've been in this world of like, woohoo, like what can we do in this world of AI? You know, it's a little scary, but it's also incredible. What can we do? Now it's what should we do? How much is it going to cost? And how are we going to know it's delivered the value? And I would say a little bit outside of this, but any Gen AI COE leader or organization, I say you have to hold the question of value, and measuring value in a world of agentic AI is really hard. So we're going to come on to FinOps, intelligent design of how you engineer and architect, which is where most of you come in. You're so important to this. I used to say, so I'm a data guy, like data, you're the new rock stars, maybe 10 years ago. I loved hearing that. I think it might be engineers' time, at least in terms of tokenomics. You're the new rock stars. So congratulate yourselves, grow out your hair, get a cape, whatever you want to do. So I think there's that. And so what I think our research shows basically the inflection point for thinking about moving more to an enterprise, or at least a hybrid enterprise model, where you might be bringing things back more on-prem, or at least in a hybrid model. It starts to tip around 10 billion tokens per annum, right? And our research then shows once you get to 67 billion tokens per annum, your kind of hybrid or on-prem AI factory, if you will, is starting to outperform APIs. And then when you get to 84 billion tokens per annum, the AI factory is outperforming not only APIs, but neo cloud providers and all the other alternatives. So I'm not a zealot. We're not zealots. Like, I'll cheat to the end. I think the end game of this is you need a flexible model. And many organizations are not thinking about that model, right? And they may not ever be in a position where they're going to scale to 84 billion tokens a year. That's okay. But some organizations will. And if you don't have FinOps discipline, if you don't have intelligent design and engineering in your Gen AI and overall tech stack, you're going to be in Admiral Akbar's world. It's going to be a trap. And some organizations will be out of business, or there will be very serious questions asked of the public sector on, like, how could you let this happen? So it is a really serious thing. I might close with like Jevons paradox. I don't know if you know. So people think, wow, as things become more simple, they're going to become cheaper. And that's the narrative for AI. So Jevons paradox is they are going to be cheaper, but it's going to be so great and so cheap that we're going to consume more. And I think that's why, from a Deloitte perspective and other perspectives, we've become so interested in this now, because there's an opportunity to get out kind of ahead of this, think about tokens as something other than a kind of consumption or processing model, and more an additional economic indicator linked to value. So I would really want to, if you were trapped in an elevator with me for 5 minutes, and you might feel like you are, I would leave you with this idea of we should and can think of tokens differently. That takes a different set of skills and discipline than many organizations have today. But that in and of itself is not enough. The kind of tokenization as a measure of an economic unit needs to be linked to value and business outcome. And in my mind, that's even harder to measure than economic value. So I might leave it there.
Wonderful. So I want to bring the discussion to Johnny now. Tokens as a measure of economics is not enough. We need to link it to value. In terms of the kind of public sector clients and the private sector clients that you advise and work with, where are you seeing that play out? Where are you seeing the biggest areas of challenge as well?
Yeah. I'll poach the mic just to the camera. Cameras don't have ears, I've been reassured. So hopefully I can project enough. So yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, there's a huge amount of rich stuff there that Eric's just spoken about, where like I very deliberately just then didn't put my hand up about whether I'm using agents day to day, because I think the goalposts have shifted to a large extent when it comes to how we think about agents. I think most of that conversation is something that many of us in the room who are engaged in this space, who are proactively involved, have seen the fact that the goalposts are shifting to potentially benefit certain organizations, certain individuals. And I think there are things that many of the people in this room will be doing that could be classified as truly agentic. I have full faith hearing what Eric's just spoken about, that, we can absolutely put that in that bucket. A lot of the open source work that we're doing in Red Hat, yes, it leans that direction. But sadly for me, the value conversation is directly tied to that problem of how we qualify and quantify whether something is truly agentic, because this space has been dominated by snake oil for some time, and I don't think that is going to go away. So we have a duty, especially for those of us working in the public sector, to advise, advocate, nudge, and potentially ask really challenging questions to ensure that actually there is a contrast between what may be snake oil and what's actually real and tangible. And that comes back to the value question fundamentally. because there's a whole stack of hard-won lessons that are being forgotten very, very rapidly. So many of us will have worked in domains where it's very like, let's say, waterfall, which can be appropriate for certain contexts. There's great ways of describing whether a situation is simple or complex and whether we should be delivering in one way or another, whether something is knowable or whether it's a chock full of unknowable unknowns. And I think broadly speaking, that also then drives us towards that domain of how we qualify and quantify value based on outcomes rather than output. And so tokenomics is really valuable, but as has been alluded to, it needs to be directly tied to what the hell does this actually achieve? What are we looking at? Is there something tangible there? Is it value delivery that we're staring down the barrel of, where someone's life has been changed, the user need has been met, a service has been simplified? And I think equally as well, again, coming back to that point of like, are we looking at things that are truly agentic? There is a really key challenge here around the problems that we're trying to solve, because AI is amazing and Gen AI capabilities and machine learning capabilities can accomplish a huge amount, especially when clever people like those of you in this room, clever, attractive, and really funny people like those of you in this room, put their brains to interesting, novel challenges. There's a huge amount of good stuff that can be done, huge amount of good stuff that can be achieved. But I am seeing large volumes of people, and this is not just public sector, but large volumes of people focusing on solved problems. And so my argument would be, like, we do not live in a society where, and I'm going to say this extra loud for the people that may be in a different part of this building, as it's number 10. So there's a large volume of people who are struggling to differentiate between novel value, so the things that we are yet to solve but actually are impacting society, and the things that broadly should be commodity. And for those of you who haven't heard of Wardley mapping before, so hopefully a few of you will have come across Wardley mapping, really valuable practice. Like, if I was to articulate one thing, it would almost be in those domains where we won lots of hard lessons. The people who really led the DevOps revolution, for example, the people who created books like Team Topologies, or anyone who was involved in like Phoenix Project, books that many of you will be familiar with, the guys who were part of IT Revolution, the publishing house. Many of the skills that made them really successful were convening, mapping, and being able to facilitate difficult conversations to build a shared picture of reality. And in the domain of AI, those mapping practices are more important than ever. So again, hard-won lessons around things like domain-driven design, using practices like Wardley mapping, bringing things like team topologies together to understand how a system actually works, value stream mapping, for example. And so this is really the kind of challenge that we're looking at the moment, where we can count the volume of tokens, but we need to tie that back to, was the outcome actually achieved? And was that outcome something that was novel, something that we really needed, or was it us rediscovering fire? Because as I say, we are not living in a day and age where all of the difficult challenges have been solved. So again, a very valid ambition for our new Prime Minister, talking about solving homelessness, for instance. That is a very real problem that is an issue in society that has not been fixed yet. Hopefully it is something that we can fix, albeit really complex, really challenging. I'm sure all of you could think of something that would make society better that is not solved yet. Again, you're super clever. You're here in this room. Clearly, there's something good that you're doing. So we don't have the time to be reinventing a wheel. We don't have the time to be rediscovering things that broadly should be commoditized. We should be focusing on novel value. And I think when it comes to the organizations I'm working with, the biggest challenge that we face is that there isn't a strong conversation happening today about where the value really lives, where the value resides. How do we identify the novel challenges? But there's a caveat to that. Just because something now can be achieved with AI doesn't mean it's the most valuable challenge for us to solve. And so actually, many of the novel things that are yet to be solved were probably already being worked on before all of the cool Gen AI agentic stuff was happening. And so that really is, I think, the biggest challenge that we face, is looking at the landscape, the chessboard, thinking about which problems are yet to be solved, anchoring in whether that was a problem that was already underway in terms of like resolution. But ideally trying to really question, just because we can burn through tokens on this thing, is it actually going to get us somewhere that's impactful? Because the whole thing has to be anchored in impact. Life is too short. We don't have enough hours on this planet to be doing things that are meaningless. Hopefully that resonates.
So I mean, that there's thank you for such an insightful set of thoughts, Johnny. One thing that struck me there was that it's that concept of reinventing the wheel, right? And, Chris, I think it's fair to say, in some respects, we've been here before, right? The ambition that businesses have to automate processes, simplify things, make them replicable. Robotic process automation came before agentic AI, and certainly when I think of UiPath pre-agentic AI, that's kind of what comes to mind. So there is a lot that's been done before in this arena. My question to you is, based on your experience and the kind of boardrooms you're in and the businesses you're working with, what are people doing that works well right now? That people who are successful are realizing ROI off, do you think they're doing right?
Yeah. Imagine me microphone time. So Johnny's touched on a few things. I think I spend a lot of time in boardrooms with commercial and technical leadership teams that are battling with a lot of the conversation topics today. I think something that always brings a wry smile whenever we're talking about tokenomics, token maxing, the cost crisis of tokens, Uber slashing their development budget due to whatever incurred that. I said to you the other day, Matt, I actually think in many ways it's not a cost crisis, it's a comprehension crisis, which talks to some of what Johnny alluded to, that the best businesses I work with have a deep and intimate understanding of how they scope out and deliver solutions for their business. And it tends to follow a pretty similar pattern, using things like value stream mapping, using things like Google's design sprints that they pioneered, many, many years ago. But it ultimately always starts with a plan, which usually starts with why. Why are we even trying to build anything here? And within that planning phase, they will be thinking about what is the existing. I work heavily in supply chain and commercial operations and merchandising functions. So gnarly functions within a business that has a lot of complexity around how you make decisions related to forecasting, related to how much stock we should buy, how much, how we should price our products. So with that context, they'll often be looking at what is the existing as-is process today? What do we want it to look like if we were to augment it or completely transform it and change the way that process is done? And then what are the KPIs we're looking to affect or move the needle on? And this is all to Eric and Johnny's quote on the value side of the equation, not cost side of the equation. And I think one does forget the other. The KPIs are critical. A lot of the businesses we work with aren't just thinking about tier one KPIs like EBITDA, working capital efficiencies, revenue growth. They're thinking about tier two, like cycle time of decisions. They're thinking about tier three, like NPS or customer experience. So often the way in which they think about value is pretty sophisticated. And that ultimately enables a team of people walking into a room for half a day or a full day to map out a solution along an array of priorities that they have and figure out on the back of a napkin, what do we think we could move the needle on if we were to transform or augment this process? They then typically move to the business case planning, where they'll work with someone in finance, and that could be literally a half-hour phone call or conversation, but to understand what is the price we're willing to pay to achieve the outcome that we think you can achieve with the solution design, and what costs are we willing to incur to achieve the price, right? So classic capital allocation, we're spending money for a reason, usually, outside of raw experimentation, learning. So what are we actually trying to move the needle at? Business case locked in, then typically we're moving to a pilot or MVP phase. So this is where probably everyone in this room, will live and breathe every day, but where we're looking at the price of the outcome we're trying to achieve and the costs we're willing to pay, and then using our telemetry, eval harnesses, model routing decisions, and any rate limiting we need to put in, or deterministic gateways that say if we infringe on what we were trying to achieve and the outcome we were trying to drive, how do we kill this pilot? Basically, it isn't working. And if everything's great, which it always is, obviously, that we move to production and we start to scale it out, use back testing, use counterfactual analysis to ensure that as it scales into production, we're continuing to see the kind of outcome that we want against the cost that's being deployed. The one thing I would say is those first two buckets are where most businesses really, really struggle in it. I would say that is what separates the best companies I work with, of whom some are the world's biggest enterprises to amazing mid-market manufacturers to some startups. What I've observed, and we'll probably all recall the MIT Lambda kind of research, 95% of AI projects aren't delivering any real ROI. We've also seen the massive investments from Anthropic and OpenAI and full deployed engineering companies, which to me says that there's an API there, but something isn't working in how we actually solutionize and deliver valuable solutions into real businesses that have operational complexity. And a lot of the research has shown that most of the failure in AI projects is due to workflow issues, change management issues, and technical integration pattern issues. And all of that, leads to huge investments in FDEs, obviously. One thing I will say anecdotally, I've seen the most ridiculous upsurge in being in leadership meetings and seeing people arrive at a leadership meeting with a vibe-coded application to provoke a conversation about something. And that is interesting and sometimes valuable. But often what it does is completely derail a conversation, a discussion about valuable use cases. Johnny alluded to, like, what are the novel things people are working on? And there is now this ferocious competition in often very sophisticated, smart businesses, where it's fun for everyone to like vibe code and build shit in the evening and then turn up to a business meeting, have a chat about it. What it's actually doing is shortening this planning cycle at the front, where people think deeply about why they're trying to build something, the solution design, the value side of the equation, the cost side of the equation, and then go and build something really quickly. And all of that can be done very, very quickly. But what I'm now seeing in a lot of leadership meetings across many different businesses is the conversations start from a perspective of a pre-baked concept of a product that is actually derailing a lot of deeper, more critical thinking about an actual solution that can drive value. So that's what I'm seeing. The best companies, they're still holding true to what Johnny mentioned, classic things that have been around for decades, scoping, thinking thoughtfully about solution design.
And that's a wonderful opportunity to bring Ruby to the conversation because, like you said, people are spending money for a reason and it's driven by an outcome. But so far, so much of the conversation has been around what we could call enterprise, governance, controls. There's a lot of process in that. And, really, your world is fast-paced innovation, R&D, particularly in national security, where speed matters. Do you think that this kind of talk of cost governance and a process, does that just get in the way of innovation?
I mean, and just to clarify, am I allowed to heckle the front row? I mean, yeah, I'm an innovation lead in an innovation company, as Matt said, working in some pretty pacey government environments. So I feel like this is naturally when I come in with a hot take that says that all governance is bad and we should have a UK Doge that just slashes all of that. That's not what I'm going to say. So I think it's really easy to see governance as stifling innovation when people are vibe coding in this way, and particularly when governance is brought in at the very end of the process as a sort of tick box exercise, whether you can kind of push that into wider production or scale it. Particularly in the high trust environments that I work in, if you have good governance built in, that I find that's actually speeding up innovation, because the worst thing you can do is kind of give a team the vague remit to go innovate with Agentic and then not tell them what that budget is or what the risk appetite is. So if you get those guardrails built in early, I've actually seen much more interesting projects come to fruition because everyone knows what the rules are of engagement. I think, like, to Eric's point around just the cost predictability question, which is thankfully not my job to figure out. Thank you for that tokenomics paper. But genuinely, obviously in a government space, but also just with the SMEs I work with, if you can't realistically say, what it's going to cost, then that's your innovation stifled, right? And particularly when another mistake, since I'm just listing people's mistakes, is when I see a budget put together for a kind of experimentation POC demo environment, but that has no relation to the reality and what production would look like. So I think in a lot of the work I'm doing at the moment, that cost predictability, that's the silver bullet for any kind of chance of scaling and really using agentic in a useful way. And it's not even that it has to be cheap, just that we know how much it's going to cost. That's kind of it for me. So,
yeah. Before I want to then bring the discussion to maybe some of the technical things that we could lean to influence cost. But I just wonder, does anyone have a perspective on that innovation versus governance question? That feels like quite a beautiful point. Anyone like?
Well,
Johnny on the spot.
Yeah, happily, to be honest, because I feel like, so for myself working in the UK public sector, obviously this is a week of change. There's been huge amount shifting in the landscape of government. Department of Science, Innovation and Technology has been disbanded, much of which will now be in the Department of Business and Trade and Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, both with sort of like slightly shifted names. And equally, a whole bunch of responsibility will be going back to the Cabinet Office, potentially including some of the AI agenda. And how this ties into some of those questions about, like, where does governance live? How do we think about governance and how do we think about innovation? Comes into where a colleague of mine actually had a reflection about those government changes earlier today, where they said, how can we decouple digital from innovation? Because effectively, there's a perspective that you've got an innovative team doing the stuff with like the incubator for AI in government, alongside a whole bunch of existing digital services, alongside a whole host of policy people and all the science stuff, the supercompute. And I think this is actually a question that ties back to most businesses, most business landscapes of what is the structure around delivery? What is the structure of ownership? And coming back to that point as well, of like all of these executives walking into rooms who've vibe coded up something and have decided that you no longer need Salesforce or HubSpot because guess what? I built one in my bedroom over the weekend. The understanding of what you're buying with a license, for example, and then governing, should we be, I mean, to use a WTF, because it's only fitting, WTF is your actual business. Like, what are you doing reinventing the wheel around some of these things? And so, I mean, fundamentally, I'm a firm believer in governance, but I think it's the way that we approach it. Again, hard-won lessons. What did we learn from the DevOps movement? Well, fundamentally, we need to bake this stuff in early, shift left. We need to have platforms where we've done the shift left work to think about stuff early and often, and then shift some of that pressure and responsibility down into platforms so that, again, we commoditize, we have shared foundations. We don't have every single team in the organization having to spin up the same capabilities, leading to this sprawl, which slows us down. And when we do that, when we have really effective platforms, the governance should be baked in. So there's a really good quote about platforms to say the first aspect of any good platform should actually be a test suite. And I don't think that's any different when we think about agentic capabilities. Because if we give everyone the tools to validate, to verify, to secure, to measure, it puts us in a much stronger position to build with confidence. And then the other aspect of that as well is, again, to come back to mapping. Do we have visibility on what other people are doing? Because if I'm there, like most of our businesses are not AWS. We aren't in a position where we're able to cannibalize the replica of something that someone else has built that looks a hell of a lot like the thing that's over there. We need to be in a place where actually we have an understanding what everyone else is doing. And when something good exists, we can consume it, we can draw it down. And I would argue that's governance as well. Because realistically, an understanding of our landscape, an understanding of how these capabilities stitch together and what it's going to cost us, bluntly, not just in terms of tokens, but also people costs. And importantly, I would say like people is the key word there, because we often talk about people as if they're not people. People distinctively should be seen as humans. But then there's a whole host of other things that come into the cost equation, balance the gates, the ROI. We need, much like Eric's mentioned, much like we've lent into, like that FinOps discipline being brought into the world of AI so that we have a mature understanding of the full picture, the full landscape, and governance right up front, but importantly, not as stage gates, but as enablers. And so to quote John Smart, like you should have a value enablement team, probably more than a PNO, let's say, yes, more than some sort of structure that's going to be the gatekeepers right at the end of the process. including security as well. Security upfront, please.
There's a lot in that. Maybe it would be interesting to talk about what you in the Deloitte, I don't know if you personally call it this, but Eric, but the Deloitte report refers to AI factories, the notion of self-hosting. Do you think that if we're thinking about enterprises that we're jumping away from our innovation startup now, but enterprises that generate 1 billion tokens, 10 billion tokens, a kind of order of magnitude, should they be thinking about hosting their own model?
I think not at that number. If that's per annum, I think you can be in the world. I need to know what your business did and what your long-term plan was, but I think our white paper suggests if you're in the world of 10 billion tokens per annum, or API and kind of SaaS-based models where you're experimenting or your low volume can work. I work with loads of clients though that have scale bigger than that. So we recently worked with UK FCDO to help Ukraine build its national Gen AI COE. So they're going to be well beyond 84 billion tokens per annum in Ukraine, and they also have questions of sovereignty, which we haven't. Sovereignty is the other thing that's different than tokenomics, right? So this is what makes our world so exciting. Is it's kind of I never answer a short question with a short answer. But so I think what we would suggest and what I would suggest is every organization is different. You need your own hybrid model that is contextualized and authentic to your business and your growth strategy. So that almost certainly means you will want to experiment because we're still in an age of experimentation. So SaaS models are fine. API models are fine. They're less fine if you don't have FinOps and governance discipline and you don't have a handle on value. I mean, I said I wasn't a zealot, but I am a zealot on a few things. And any technology leader that I speak with, especially that gets to own AI, I say, you have to own question of value. And that means hands and feet and smart people that define value and measure it for you. Because if you farm out your value narrative, you are done. You are out of business before you even succeed. But then the flip side is valuation can be seen as another form of heavy governance. Oh, you want me to measure value now? I'm doing it. I'm doing the thing. I got enough to do. And I'm being tongue in cheek, right? But they're right. I mean, these are folks on the coalface trying to do good, right? So this idea of proportional governance is like so hard. And again, your model of, I'm gonna choose where I have less control, kind of SaaS model or an API model. Then if I'm going to scale and that kind of magic number is around 80 billion tokens per annum, maybe I want to be thinking about bringing in and building my own on-prem AI. You don't have to call it an AI factory, but just you bring it in-house because you're going to have more control. At the tipping point of 80 billion, the CapEx that you have to do early to build all of that, to cool it, to do all the things you need to do, starts to become worth it at around 80 billion tokens per annum, is our view. So I would offer you that as a benchmark. But even those organizations that are large still want an experimental capability. It is still perfectly fine to go, and I think you should have a SaaS model and an API model. And then if you're going to get big enough or sovereignty is important enough to you, you should be thinking hard and early about a kind of on-prem, or you can do hybrid. You can do, that doesn't have to be on-prem, AI factory models. So I guess that will be my answer. And you notice how I snuck in the question of value there, and like, don't cede it. And if you are a leader, don't let it go. And if you know leaders, if they try to give away the question of value ownership, tackle them in the hallway. MLOps, he says.
There's an art to, as you say, taking a short question to,
Yes.
giving a lot detailed and insightful answer.
Meandering.
No, definitely not. Never. But no, that's, I mean, it's fair to say that taking it in-house doesn't necessarily mean hosting a 100 billion breeze or more. That's something absurd like that.
I don't know.
But fine.
I'm sorry. I'm going to do the Columbo thing as well. It's just one more thing. So the other thing that's like super important in this is the design. is engineering design. And that is as important. And I didn't say enough. You can choose a model and like who you're buying it from, but a capability that's really switched on that gets you optimized use of GPUs, right? And this idea, I have clients and I'm sort of like this, right? I always want the best thing. You don't have to use a frontier model for everything. And I've worked with really switched on clients. They don't even need AI. They need RPA. And they're like, I want Gen AI, please. Right. So this idea of intelligent design of your stack, I thought becomes really key and kind of throttling through. When you need a frontier model, great, use it. When you need a kind of small language model, great, use it. Like how can you optimize the stack that you have is as important a thing as how you consume your JavaScript.
Good. Just sneak one tiny thing up. Just to that point as well, like how do you optimize your stack for that degree of flexibility, optionality? Like value today may not be value tomorrow. And one huge issue I'm seeing is people building multiple stacks because they're building one thing for one way of working, but then may not be fit for the feature. So if they then do start exploring small language models, if they do then start exploring a domain where it's not all frontier, open source models, they've gone so heavily down the SaaS or API route. And especially, and I know that we've had a few call-ups of that. If that's not going to be the way that you do things forever, then why on earth are you taking absolutely everything, betting the house, the dog, and the kids on one way of doing things that is not flexible and not adaptable? Agree.
And so on that, and on that question of small language models, I wondered, Chris, from your perspective, do you see a role for small language models in the enterprises that you work with? If so, what does that look like?
Yeah, so, I mean, for context, we, for the past 10 years, have built and delivered machine learning-based solutions, let's call it, into the supply chain and into commercial operations. So over the past few years, as Agentic has run riot throughout every organization, we inevitably have started to add agents upstream and downstream of the machine learning solution, right? So if I think about a live example for a very large building materials manufacturer, we have historically deployed a solution that optimizes the price of every single quote that flows through their business. So every day they have hundreds of thousands of quote requests with complex bills and materials that get emailed in to a shared inbox or on a Excel spreadsheet or on a PDF in variable formats where products are called different things, SKUs are identified in different ways, and where we have started to see some use in small language models in instances where there is a highly predictive task, significant volume, where let's say that the main use cases are classification and extraction type tasks. So in supply chains where you have to classify a product as part of a particular category, or extraction where you need to extract unstructured and structured data from one format and then pass it into another system in another format. And we've seen the evolution of small language model based agents replace a lot of conventional RPA-based activities with these new types of capability where the cost profile still looks very healthy for these highly predictable token consumption tasks. Where we definitely don't see it currently is anywhere where there's variability or significant levels of inference required. And we may continue to see that, for a while. I think what is interesting in, some of the engineering teams within our own business and other businesses that we work with, I caught on social media just before this. Cursor have just released some research from today. You guys might have seen it, that they've tried to reproduce, I think, SQLite using 985 pages worth of documentation and given it to an array of different models from Fable through to Fable running solo, Opus running solo, and then Opus operating as a planner, and Composer 2.5 running as the executor. And the cost profile, which shouldn't really surprise anyone in this room, but the cost profile on the Fable only side is about 15x using Opus plus Composer. and then every variable in between. I think Fable plus Composer 2.5 is about 2x. So I think that type of research is really valuable to think out in the open to show how we can, even at the most basic level, be a little bit cuter in how we design these multi-agent systems. And these are some of the conversations that are starting to come before.
I haven't seen the research from Cursor yet, but I will say I hope they have a good test suite.
Yes.
Okay, so, Johnny, this is the perfect opportunity for us to talk about open source. We could probably talk a lot about open source, right? The fundamental question here is, if we're talking about small language models as the economic lever, where do you see the value of open weight models and open source tooling? Are they being adopted at a sufficient magnitude from your point of view? Or more should we be doing? What's your perspective?
I mean, so to take a short question and give a short answer, are they being adopted enough? Absolutely not. But diving into it, I think broadly we're in a position of people broadly don't know what they don't know. And so a huge amount of focus around open source capability has been oriented around open source models exclusively without necessarily understanding all of the layers of an open source stack that can then actually empower organizations to embrace optionality. And again, to Eric's point as well, diving into digital sovereignty, for me, that's very much about agency, choice, and control. It's an umbrella concept that actually captures anything strategic a business should be thinking about when they consider AI, but more broadly as well, their tech strategy, their strategic landscape. And so this is where open source is really vitally important. And I think we're looking at a very fascinating world at the moment for many, many reasons. But I think arguably the dichotomy between Chinese models and American models is something that many of us will be interested and engaged in. But especially the kind of narrative positioning. This is something I find really interesting around American models versus Chinese models and how manufactured that may be. Critically as well, there was some really good analysis around OpenAI being used in a military context where Anthropic said, no, we're not going to be used in this context. And what it did was give people a kind of excuse to look at closed proprietary models as if we have the good model or the bad model, or the model that might align with some of our values versus the other one that may not. But arguably, when we look at a kind of spectrum of where these models are, that closed proprietary landscape is still something where those things are much closer on a spectrum than any model that would be deeply inspectable with open weights, completely transparent information about training data, which again, Chinese open models are not necessarily in that domain either. There's a lot of obscurity around how they've been trained and where that information actually came from. So then when we dive into a landscape of what does truly open source mean? Let me think about models. What are the criteria for that? And what does that mean for democracy? And I think really that's the high level stuff that I'm often kind of diving into is, what does it say about your organization if you are completely happy handing, as Eric's alluded to as well, handing away the keys to the kingdom, letting someone else define the decisions that your organization might make or take, and especially around small language models. If we want to be in a domain where we have greater levels of control, greater levels of influence, and starting with something that we can really inspect. And a key caveat here, I'm sure there's many people in this room who are smart enough to actually dive into a model, think about what the weights are, think about how it operates, think about how it's been trained. However, for the average person, the average citizen, the average employee, the knowledge that someone can do that is still vitally important, even if they themselves are not the person doing it. Could I learn to inspect this? Could I learn to actually be in a place where I understand how this works? Or do I know that there's going to be someone in a near vicinity to me, whether it's in Manchester, London, Bristol, who could actually inspect these things? That's reassuring and fundamentally important. But if I want to start from a place where I end up with a hyper-efficient model that is going to deliver on my needs, some of that then is an open source stack. So tooling like VLM, LLMD, these capabilities that enable inference to be more efficient, where I'm using fewer tokens to get to the same outcome. All of that stuff is good. And open source critically, whether it be OpenPOR or things like those capabilities I've just mentioned, are coming from an open source domain. But then going up the stack towards the models and towards the application layer, arguably, if I want something that really fits my business, the values of the organization, fits what a government might want to do, my democratic values, then the best place I would argue to start from is something open. So hopefully that's valuable. To be fair, Ruby, I feel like there's definitely a key hot take around this as well, around how open it is into.
And well, it's conveniently the next section is directed at Ruby, and it's exactly on that, right? Where are you seeing the adoption of open weight models in where you work, and what's your perspective on it?
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you. So yeah, how hot do we want to take? I mean, I think, okay, so I would say we're seeing cautious, shy, use case led, kind of government interest in this open source question. Absolutely, they're asking all the same questions that you've just brought up in terms of where does that data sit, how auditable is it, like how do we avoid vendor lock-in? Like these are all kind of existential questions that open source takes a lot of those boxes. I think there's two factors in terms of, if I'm jumping back to some of the small language model conversation from before, Dan George, who's the chief scientific advisor for national security, she gave a really interesting speech yesterday around tech in general, but as you can imagine, AI came up a lot. And, she was very proud to announce all these behemoth frontier models that are now in top secret environments in the UK, which, to be fair, took quite a long time to get them into those environments. So it's not to be sniffed at. But I do think whether it's cost or whether it's, to Eric's point around the suitability of some of those frontier models, there's a wide understanding now that you don't need a supercar to do the school run. Like these are really exciting and fun to play with, but actually not hugely practical for a lot of government use cases. So I think definitely seeing that sort of mix of the right fit model for the right tasking and having that sort of heterogeneous system of models. Now, the open source, open weight model, that it feels like it should be a no-brainer for government. Like, great, it's inspect. You can inspect it, you can audit it. Obviously, much more control than a standard kind of closed API. But I think the question comes back to who's going to pay for that sometimes. So, because it's not just the model and the cost of model, it's obviously like from a government perspective, also just any large organization perspective, security, user training, integration into legacy infrastructure. I'm not breaking the official CPOS Act to say there's a lot of legacy infrastructure involved in government. And so that I think that's the only counterbalance or kind of it's sort of like hot take from government in terms of, okay, it's great that we have the control, but actually all that governance is just being pushed back onto the customer, which is UK Gov. However, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Johnny, in terms of as long as someone can do it, then that does alleviate a lot of the issues and allow, government to embrace some of these quite nippy-zippy small models. As long as there is a route to audit it, then that leaves the use cases open to bring that much closer into mission. So it's a fun space. I think like lots of debate, but it's definitely not a very different place in the UK than in the US, where the only debate is Anthropic or so yeah.
I mean, there's a really crucial point in that, right? Which is now the security is assurance and analysis simply adds another variable to that ROI equation. Okay, so I think it would be good to get some questions from audience. Do we have any?
I specifically told people during like ask difficult questions.
You've told.
Yeah, and like mainly Chris. He loves answering them. So.
I said so. It's beautiful.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Andy, please.
Hi, Matt. So there's been a lot of discussion about obviously tokens getting more expensive and budgeting for tokens. But also, didn't that lot of people tell us tokens are zero? So if tokens become, it doesn't matter how many you spend, does it mean that this discussion doesn't really matter? You can just use as many as possible and the highest model as fast as possible?
So if the unit value of a token goes to zero, does it matter? Yes, is the question. So, does anybody want to give a point of view on that?
My initial point of view is they're not going to go to zero, because there are profit-making businesses out there that are never going to let them go to zero. I guess that's my initial response. If theoretically they went to zero, would it change this conversation? I guess, but I don't think my view is that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you still have to question the value as well. That would be my, even if it's literally free, you still have the question of, okay, but are we generating value? Because human time isn't free. The other point there, and I agree with Eric, if you think Anthropic and OpenAI are both preparing for IPOs, the cost of the token is not going to go to zero when they have public shareholders holding to account as well. Why do you want it?
I was just going to add on a tiny thing as well. I'm having increasing conversations with government organizations about bottlenecks and the idea of like, where is the bottleneck within agentic solutions? So within the broader conversation of tokenomics is when we're then thinking about, and it ties into Ruby's point, right workload, right place, and nothing new. This is basic platform engineering, DevOps kind of thinking, right workload, right place. There is some stuff. So I was really concerned to hear about a large government organization where they can't get enough compute in the UK, which means they've said yes to doing inference over in the US on US servers. And then you have to question what data is flowing over there. How is that then being exposed? And the fact that, as we know, most inference around models is happening in like plain text, essentially, because that's just how a lot of Gen AI works. So it's a really interesting piece around like, if tokens go to zero, do we then have to be living in an economy where energy is so abundant that that is free and we don't factor that into tokenomics? Where the compute costs then drop to zero, because again, we've got, and so the path towards, I think as a conceptual exercise, it's really interesting to say, what would it take for a token to get to zero? But equally, I think coming back to Eric's point on like Jevons paradox, humans are like a gas, right? We cannot help ourselves but fill the space we're given. And for better or worse, I think that's going to be the case of like, if you find that tokens go to zero, there'll be another thing, whether we call it like a meta token or a super token or whatever it might be, which then does get accompanied by cost. Because it is like Jevons paradox manifest, essentially, I think.
I think that's a fair response to your question.
Highlight rules.
No.
Should we go over here, please? So just ties to the point you made about energy. Does an organization's ESG impacts and their obligations, does that linearly correlate to the tokenomics?
So does an organization, I'll repeat the question for everybody, does an organization take into account their ESG obligations in that token economic equation that's
I think, yeah, I'll have you're not stopping using me. Okay, so I think one of the things I'm seeing is 50% wishful thinking, 50% kind of like reasonable educated guess on the sustainability question around looking at these parallel technologies that might make all of this a lot more sustainable. Yeah. So things like neuromorphic computing, like absolutely, there's something like this will be the silver bullet and it'll be much, much more efficient. I'm seeing some wild and wonderful things with like bioengineering and like mushroom compute. If you had a look at that, like that's your evening on YouTube. And I think I'm seeing a lot of like very creative use, like allusions to this technology in terms of we're going to scale, but don't worry because one or two of these other big bet technologies will make sure that the sustainability is just fine. I'm personally not seeing a huge amount of evidence yet, but I'm a pessimist. I don't know.
Fair. I mean, I think is it a consideration? Yes, it's a cost consideration in tokenomics and the CapEx expense of kind of the data center you got to cool and the environment that you've got to control. But then there's the kind of social value, ethical side, which is independent. So I think yes, it's a cost consideration. Should it be an ethical consideration? Yes. Do all organizations bring the kind of ethics, social value into their corporate or governmental thinking? Not always. As far as I've seen, so the better companies and my morals and my politics do, but not every company will.
There was just one tiny thing to bolt onto that as well. I was really fascinated by a debate that I had at pub with someone about, they were working at a scale-up, and the scale-up to B Corp, but their B Corp now is using a huge amount of Gen AI for almost everything. Unfortunately, they're in a place where actually they're doing a great job of making sure it's not slop. There's a lot of refinement. They're using loops. They're trying to move in that agentic direction to like filter things down to high quality results. Their token cost is shooting up and up and up, which is why they were interested in speaking to us about open source inference and some of that cool stuff to drive token costs down. But can you be a B Corp? Like, where are we in that? And I think that's a really interesting debate to be asked.
That's the next WTF, like, to be honest. That's this whole session. So,
can you be a B Corp and also do Gen AI? We'll go Ifalo probably first, and then Robert.
Yeah. Do you not think it's more important that organizations ensure that they're getting talent that can use AI effectively for it to be cheap and useful? Because we keep talking about token costs going down, making better models. But fundamentally, if you can get better talent that can use AI more effectively, that'll make it more useful and cheap. But I don't know why no one, how we actually about in that at the moment,
Yeah, so is the real economic lever here actually just best talent that can have then a multiplying effect on that? Yeah, a use.
I mean, just to volunteer someone else, Johnny, I feel like. But you touched on that people point earlier, and I would love to hear more about it.
Oh, so I had a fantastic conversation with a senior person in government the other day about the kind of like existing talent moat that we have around technology, partly because of the proprietary bias and where the incumbency bias as well has led us towards a very shallow talent moat, but people with specific skills that then constrains the mindset, like it's very blinkered towards the way that we do things. And again, that issue of we don't know what we don't know. But if we think about the people element of this, then absolutely talent is a key thing. So there's I'm kind of like very much Labrador energy when it comes to a lot of this stuff. Big waggy tail, easily amazed, slightly easily distracted. But when it comes to speaking to graduates, university students, and trying to articulate like skills for tomorrow, it doubles down on what I was saying about mapping, convening, facilitation of I'm desperate for younger people who are set to enter the workforce, but equally people who like to transition careers, because obviously we need to be really clear. Talent doesn't just have to come from a pool of younger people. It may come from people living overseas. It may come from a group of people who are retraining. But it's that skill of systems thinking. And so when we say, like, effectively, it depends if we really buy into the agentic capabilities that make it easier to, when we think about where we were a couple of years ago, of people vibe coding and thinking that was amazing, to where we are now of like, we've moved through schematic-based development towards loop-based development, towards the next horizon, where it may not just be about the people who can use the technology, but certainly the talent who can connect the dots, think about where novel value lives, communicate what they're doing effectively to have a group of people coalesce around them. Or equally as well, the talented people who can build the next open board, the people who can see where the opportunity lives for something that can harness the technology that we have today and take it to the next echelon. I mean, again, a thing that very few people are talking about, and to Ruby's point, right, a technology that is definitely not coming to save us, but does need to be on the radar is quantum. And yet, when we talk about Mythos, very few people are talking about the issue of Q-Day. So when all of our encryption just gets blown apart, it doesn't count. If we have talent that can connect the dots between all of those things, it is vitally important. It's easy to think, and again, hard-won lessons here, old hard-won lessons, because, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. There's a reason we talk about people, then process, then technology in that order. And any organization that is jumping straight to technology and disregarding, again, much to Chris's point as well, disregarding process and people will not be a winner in this domain. They will not be in the place that they could have been. So always bang the drum about talent and people, because that's what's fueling the change. That's what's fueling delivery and value.
I mean, I would say, so I think you're right to raise the question, but to me, talent and people is implicit in everything I've talked about, because if you don't have the talent, you can't measure value, you can't do intelligence design and modeling, you can't, and. And I don't mean that to be glib, like your question spot on. It was just to say, I didn't mean to ignore that at all. I think it's hugely important. And then there's leadership talent and there's value talent. There's a lot of aspects to how that I think we need more than just tech dev and all of that.
I think leadership's the real skill scout.
Yeah.
For the moment, brands have a question like we phrase it like agents can be used with RG before, but does it phrase in this way? Then agent has to be expensive to use. An agent has to be expensive to be used. Agree or disagree? Go around everybody.
Yeah. Subbing me. If it's dirt cheap, I have questions about how useful it is. And I think that is where you get into this RPA space of tinkering and cute efficiencies, but not actually moving the needle. Where I would say it does not have to be earth-shatteringly Silicon Valley expensive is part of that open source question. So somewhere in the middle, I'm going to give a really half-assed that. Somewhere in the middle. I don't think it has to ruin you financially for generations. But I think if it's dirt cheap, most certainly question.
Like, could it not be like this? But sorry, flying back. Will it not this like each agent has outcome to achieve? Now, depending upon how complex that outcome is, that is going to define how much complex it's going to be and how usefulness is
That's it.
a relative term. Then
That's exactly in terms of value.
That's what's changing, right? Not what can we build, what should we build, what value will it deliver, and how will we know it's delivered the value? I mean, I guess it's the old Ferrero Rocher joke, right? Say this about management consultancy. I'd use this a lot. Reassuringly expensive. So agents are the only reassuringly expensive agents are good ones? Absolutely not. I think, and can agents be cheap and effective? I think no, but I do think there is a cost optimized point back to proportionality where you have controlled and optimized the costs for the value you want using agents. I think that is very difficult, but achievable. And I think that's what each organization is seeking to do.
There's so one thing that maybe puts a bit of a cat amongst the pigeons, should we say, I guess, is just the idea. It's speaking to quite a lot of organizations about the idea of like wafer thin AI or wafer thin agents, wafer thin. Because it depends to some extent what you're giving your agent access to. So, and this is directly kind of teeing up Chris actually, but if you're giving agents access to fantastic automation software, then actually how much of this thing actually needed to be, like, depending, again, coming back to right at the start, how do we define an agent? What actually is an agent? Is it just an LLM? Is it an LLM with a harness and the whole host of things? And then do we tap that in via APIs or directly in via MCP, whatever it might be, to an additional tool chain? And whatever's in the stack, ideally an adaptable, highly functional stack that can accommodate small language models, frontier models, whatever it might be. Like, we're going in big picture here. There's a lot of variables. But let's say we give that agent access to really effective automation software. How much of what we need doing could already be done with effective automation software? And then the agent is enabling that to happen more autonomously. I think that is not necessarily a solved question or something that gives a full picture. But to throw it in there, what are we giving the agent access to then enable it to be more complete in its functionality? And can that then drive down poster?
Yes. We've done it. So I'll loop back to the example I gave earlier, because I think it's probably one of the most cheap and useful agents we've certainly deployed, which the example I gave earlier, hundreds of thousands of quotes being processed, agent extracts structured and unstructured data and then puts it back into a target system. That agent for that business and for successive other businesses since has reduced quote cycle time by about 90%. Now, to an organization that's trading 20 billion, 22 billion in revenue every year, that reduction in quote cycle time has a direct knock-on impact on their ability to win more, just purely on speed of responsiveness. And when you compare holdout tests and A/B tests across commercial teams and compare the results, you can see a massive, massive uplift from the team that is leveraging this agent. And this is super cheap. It's cheaper than RPA. So it's a super cheap agent. The critical thing is the team spent a lot of time thinking about solution design, not just to loop back to what I said earlier, but there was no one rushing into the boardroom when everyone was raving about agentic and generative and say, we need to build a quote extraction agent. They were talking about, we need to rebuild our CRM. We need to, and fuck about with 100 different use cases that actually no one had thought about the solution design and the business case and where you could really leverage up the value to cost ratio. So not to ruin the dichotomy of the, can they be useful or cheap? But yeah, of course they kind of think, but what I think that's probably, not a common occurrence on the other businesses we engage with.
And thank you for the question, because that covers off my final question to everyone. So nice. Ruby, please. I'll see you coming up there. Just almost not asking for it. Yeah, taxi for one. Thank you. We've talked a lot around kind of FinOps and stuff. But if you think back to like cloud compute, how crazy that was to start with, right? And it's now settled down into a steady, mature market. It's a layer of FinOps over the top. So so is that a resource on you if it's up, etc.
do you think that sort of that level of FinOps, or do you think that this agentic equivalent is going to settle down into that steady, mature state by cloud like you did? And if so, when do you think that will happen? Or do you think the very nature of agents is the fact they have agency that really unpredictable, therefore they're never going to settle down? I mean, what do we then do from a FinOps perspective to this by on-chain? There was one question, we're not going to be waiting, it's got about 4. You say?
I think it will settle.
Yeah.
You will. I do. I mean, I think there's always going to be variability, but I think FinOps, the AI ops, whatever you want to call it, will settle as a discipline to deal with that enough.
Yeah. I mean, part of my personal view at the moment is the fact that there are so few people applying rigor to AI capabilities beyond potentially like that cloud layer. So huge issues of people that have seen cloud move from what was really well intentioned around being commodity compute, where actually it should be broadly portable, interoperable, with flexibility and freedom to move workloads around, has ended up becoming really high up the stack and highly proprietary and highly locked in, which then means there's high exit costs and all of those limiting factors. That will also drive into AI in many ways, the agentic AI capability. So that's an area, a discipline rather, that is coming into the FinOps domain, which actually I think if the timing is right, then FinOps will start to consider flexibility more as well. I think that discipline is probably going to rise into the AI domain as part of that movement. Equally, I think the disruption around things like Broadcom, for example, so Broadcom VMware, and workload density, which is a thing that had not been considered. There were certain de facto aspects of how people purchase cloud that seemed like answer questions, but actually the door's been reopened. So now that you can really get richer density of the compute. So again, the fact that FinOps is still evolving means that the door is wide open for FinOps companies to start moving towards like the agentic layer and really think about AI. Will it settle? I believe yes. Once people, because we're in that place at the moment where like we've had a taste, but at a certain point, you know, price has to be paid. I love, again, the idea of going back to like, will tokens go to zero? Maybe means the price won't have to be paid. Maybe the pipe won't come calling, knocking at the door. But for most of these businesses, as crew have suggested, we're already seeing tokens going up and up and up in cost to sort of like test what people are willing to pay. And as a consequence, the C-suite will at a certain point go, hell no. And that's already happened with businesses like Uber, businesses that are pausing development using AI and tokens because the cost has gone way too high. I think the knock on, therefore, is that settling point may not be because agents, again, Jordan's paradox, could run wild and do more and more and more. It will probably be a CFO who's been told, cull that budget, cap it, and that will then drive the efficiency and the FinOps situation there.
Okay, so I think we will leave audience questions there, but there's time afterwards to speak to our panelists and ask more questions there. Could we have a round of applause for our